Hi, I'm Jaclyn.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome back. We don't have a whole lot to chat about first thing because we just recorded part 1 less than 12 hours ago, so nothing has really happened since then.
We got done recording at like 10:30 and then went to sleep, and now it's like 10 a.m., so I haven't done really anything between those times.
Nope, we slept. I did vacuum out my dryer lint last night after we recorded because we finished recording and I went to wash the dinner dishes because I can't let them sit overnight because that bugs me. And I was just like switching out some laundry and like cleaned out the little lint trap, and then so my lint trap is weird. It's on like the back wall of the dryer instead of like in the front, which makes no, like you have to like climb in the dryer to get it. And I like cleaned out the part that comes out, and then I realized there's like all this lint around the outside, and I was like, oh my god, that's gonna start a fire. And I started like panicking, and I'm like, well, I gotta clean this out now. And then I'm like vacuuming out the inside of my dryer lint at like 11 o'clock at night. So
Did you get a lot of lint out?
I did. There was a lot of lint in there. It was bad. So I'm like, I don't know if that's
not good.
Like, has it always been there? Does it like I don't really see how it could like, I don't know. But I'll definitely know from now on to pull it out and then also scoop out the inside because
and just a PSA that be sure to clean out your dryer lint like every load, if not like sometimes I'll do every other, but at least that, because it can start a fire with all that lint in there, because if you pull it out even after 2, it's like covered.
Yeah, so, exactly. So
just be sure to do that.
PSA, always clean out your lint traps, and also apparently the inside of your dryer behind the lint trap because it can hide in there too, which I've done before in like other dryers I've had that are like in the front where you can easily like you pull it out and then you can easily see underneath there. But when I have to like dig in the back, like I had to get a flashlight, I just happened to like feel it, and you know, so it's just so we just remembered that we did not do our true crime updates yesterday before we started the episode, which we planned on doing. So we will cover those now. So we previously talked about the case in Tennessee where the remains of a child were found in the backyard of a formerly foster family that had adopted the children. And there were a couple of children still in the home who were being severely abused. And then later at their adult son's house, they found the remains of another child. So all those involved have been charged, and it did come out that I guess in Tennessee there's some kind of incentive program. If you adopt children from the foster system, you still get monthly payments for like the care of the children like you would while they were still in the foster system, which I did not know was a thing. I thought once you adopted them that the state didn't continue providing support, but I guess there's some incentive program. So this family was getting $3,000 a month for the children that they had adopted from the foster system, that 2 of them had been murdered and the others were still being severely abused. So that's just disgusting.
Yeah, and that's crazy too, because I know one family who's adopted a lot of kids out of foster care, but I also know like another family who did, and I'm like, oh, so are you getting money from that too? Like, yeah, that's crazy, because like I always just thought like once you adopted them it was like the payments stopped because, you know, all that. Yeah. But yeah, that was weird. I didn't know that.
And I don't know if it's not something that everyone gets, like if it's something that you have to specifically like apply for and have to meet like certain qualifications. I don't know. But we do know that for this family, it did not work out in the children's favor. So,
and then also we talked about Lori Vallow and how Ty Lee and JJ's bodies were found. They were found on Lori's boyfriend Chad's property, and Chad Daybell has officially been arrested. And so hopefully now they can just stay in prison and all that and just go fuck themselves, let's be honest.
Yes, 100%.
I thought I saw an article too how she was like saying how she thought the kids were zombies.
What?
I don't know. I wonder if she's doing this whole like, I'm crazy.
Probably. Well, she also said something about like the angels told her to do it or something.
Yeah. I don't know, guys.
No. If that's not your religion, you're making that up to get away with murdering your kids, and it's hopefully not going to work. Hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, Lord, if she gets out. Oof. Anyway.
Yeah.
But that is our true crime updates.
Yes.
And then if we have any more updates in the future, like we know Scott Peterson is getting like a decision soon on his appeal. If we just bring anything up that we know more information about, we'll go ahead and tell you guys about it. But yeah, so there is that. And now let's get on with our girl, Aileen.
Let's get back into Aileen. In last week's episode, we covered Aileen's childhood and her first 3 victims. So we're going to start with the 4th victim today. And hopefully the timeline here doesn't get too confusing because we have some of this happened in a very rapid time frame now. And so we have some of the murders being committed at the same times as some of the other cars and bodies being found. So they're kind of intersecting. So we try to have some dates here to kind of follow it chronologically, but hopefully it won't get too confusing with several victims kind of having some investigative stuff going on at the same time. So Aileen's 4th victim was a man named Peter Siems. He was a 65-year-old retired merchant marine and a part-time missionary. And he was known for like helping people out around town if they needed a ride somewhere. He would do the landscaping at his church. At this time, his wife Ursula was on a missionary working in Europe with their son Leonard. So on June 7th, he left his house around 9 p.m. and was planning to travel up to New Jersey to stay with his mother for a couple of weeks and then to go on to see his son Stefan in Arkansas around July. So he was planning on being gone for quite a while. He took a bunch of Bibles with him. Like we mentioned, he was a missionary, so maybe he was going to meet someone on the road that he thought that he could witness to. So he did have a bunch of Bibles on him at the time that he left his house. In one of Aileen's stories, she says that he picked her up on I-95 near Bunnell. And in another story, she says that she met him at a coffee shop when she was very drunk. So don't really know how exactly they met. But people that know Peter are like, yeah, if he saw a woman that he thought was in trouble, he would probably speak to her, pick her up. Obviously, he was a very religious man. Maybe he wanted to try to help her. So not sure how they met, but we do know that they met, obviously, at some point. So Aileen doesn't remember if they drove into Georgia or South Carolina, but she says that they had stopped somewhere. They were off in the woods. They had taken off their clothes, and they were laying on the sleeping bag when she thought he was going to rape her. So they struggled for the gun, and she ended up shooting him multiple times, and she says that she doesn't remember where she left his body. And his body has actually never been found, so we'll get into that later. But when we mentioned that 6 bodies and 7 cars were found, Peter Siems' body was never found. So on June 7th, which is the day that Peter disappeared, police found Chuck Karskadon's car abandoned off of Interstate 75. The license plate had been removed. Like we said, Aileen thought that would hide the identity. But again, they were able to find the owner from the VIN number of the vehicle. So during this summer, Tyra's sister Tracy came to stay with her and Aileen. And so we mentioned before that Aileen has a lot of interpersonal issues, this just fear of abandonment, this need to be loved. So she was super jealous of Tracy and the amount of time that her and Tyra spent together. So Tracy reports feeling uncomfortable and unsafe and said that Aileen seemed like threatening. And both Tyra and Tracy are noticing that multiple times Aileen is coming home with just some random items and another car that she claims that she borrowed from a friend. And obviously we mentioned last time that Tyra knew what happened the last time Aileen borrowed a car, so she has to be suspecting what's going on at this point. And she claims that she all of a sudden had all of this money because people who owed her money are finally paying her back. And usually when she would, quote, borrow a car, it was just for a few days. But she did have a Sunbird for several weeks that she drove everywhere, which would be Peter's car. So one day after a particularly nasty argument, basically Aileen took the weekend off work with Tyra and they were all going to go to SeaWorld together. And then once they got there, Aileen refused to go inside. And Tyra and Tracy were like, okay, well, we're not going to let you ruin this. We're going to go in anyway. And then when Aileen picked them up later, she was mad that she wasn't included. So she's just causing all kinds of issues with these sisters. And so at this point, Tracy decides that she wants to go home. So she's like, I don't really want to be around here anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's just this, like, illogical part of Aileen where she's like, I have to rob this store to see if Jay loves me and he'll stay with me. Like, I'm going to have to throw this fit to see, like, how much they push to include me. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, she's trying to test everyone.
Yes. Like, that's a perfect way to put it. So then on June 19th, Peter Siems did not call his wife in Europe as she had expected. So obviously this is the early 90s, so long distance calls were very expensive. So it's not unusual that she wouldn't talk to her husband every day if she was out of the country. But on the day that he was scheduled to call her, he never did. So she starts calling around and finds out that no one has seen or heard from him since he left his house on June 7th, which I thought was weird because I'm like, you're going to see your mom in New Jersey and it's now been 12 days. Yeah.
I wonder if she was just like, well, maybe there was, like, car trouble, because it's not like she could call him or anything. So maybe she was like, maybe he's not coming. I don't know.
12 days? I mean, I don't know. That just seemed weird to me, but we don't know what happened. So then his niece Kathleen reported him missing on June 22nd, so several weeks after he actually went missing. Now, this day is going to be very important in the grand scheme of this story. So on July 4th, Tyra and Aileen are driving around, they're drinking beer, just having a good time, they're waiting for it to get dark so they can shoot off some fireworks, and again, they're in Peter's car at this time. So, you know, Tyra's been drinking and she's driving, she misses a curve and she ends up crashing the car. So Aileen jumps out and tells Tyra to, like, follow her. She's like, we have to get out of here, and she's, like, panicking, and Tyra's like, why? Like, which, I mean, I'm like, well, you just crashed a car drunk, so you think that would be a reason to get out of there, too. Yeah. But I guess Aileen was just, like, overboard for that, so Tyra's like, why do we need to get out of here? And so Aileen tells her that she murdered a man, and this was his car. So she's like, oh, okay, so this happened again.
Another time when it's like, Tyra, if you called the police, you could have saved people.
Exactly. What are you doing, Tyra? I just don't understand. So a local family did hear the crash and came out to help, but Aileen asked them not to call the police and said that she would just get her father, who lived down the street, to come tow the car out. So after the family walked back to their house, Aileen rips off the license plate like she does, tosses it into the woods, and she's able to get the car started, which was amazing apparently considering the condition of this car. But after driving away, a front tire did collapse completely, so they had to abandon the car on the side of the road. So in typical Aileen fashion, she threw his car keys and registration in separate places off the highway, and they hitchhiked in several different cars until they finally made it home. So police found the abandoned car around 9:45 that evening, but they wouldn't speak to that family who spoke to the girls for like 2 months. So their story doesn't come forward till later. But a local man named Marvin Wood did report seeing the women walking down the street with their beer cooler, and he says it was funny because anytime a car drove by, they would hide in the bushes and then come right back out and keep walking. But from wherever his vantage point was, he saw this whole thing. So he's like, what are you doing? Yeah. And he did report seeing Aileen toss the license plate into the woods, and so police were able to find it and connect the car to Peter, who again had been reported missing like the week before and was reported as missing and endangered because nobody knew where he could be. Marvin Wood also reported that the women had blood on them, which was from the car accident, and he was able to help police draw a composite sketch of Aileen and Tyra.
Yeah, and this is just like Aileen being like, I gotta get rid of this license plate. Let me walk 5 feet down the road and toss it in the woods. Like, girl, you gotta do a little bit better job hiding than that. Like, when she, like, hid the stuff in the sand and they were like, all right, here it is. Like,
you're like, oh, okay, found it. Next. Yeah. I guess she was
But, I mean, at this point, like, she's getting away with stuff, so why would you care at all? You're just like, whatever, okay. Just throw it over here. It's been working so far.
Yeah, exactly. So, why not? So on July 9th, police held a brainstorming session in Tallahassee because detectives on the multiple cases in different jurisdictions are starting to see, okay, we now have 3 homicides of naked male victims found in the woods having been robbed. So obviously we're starting to see that there is some kind of connection here, so maybe we have a serial killer. We need to start kind of putting our work together, basically. So On July 30th, a man named Eugene Troy Burress, so he went by Troy, he was 50 years old, and he had previously owned a pool store in Boca Raton before moving to Ocala to be a delivery driver for a sausage company. He did have 2 grown daughters, a 29 and 32-year-old from his first marriage to his wife Vicky, and 3 stepdaughters from his current wife of 16 years, Rose Sharon, who went by Sharon. They also had 6 grandkids. So Troy grew up in West Tennessee and was really close with his sister, and they would remain close throughout adulthood, and both of them did end up moving to Florida as well. So his sister reports that he loved to tell jokes, and he really loved his horses in Tennessee and would like to travel back home to Tennessee to see his parents and his horses. On the morning of July 30th, around 5:45 a.m., he left for work. So typically, like I said, he drove a sausage truck. So later in the weeks, he would usually drive like longer distances and stay overnight, but on Mondays he'd stay pretty close to home, so he would usually get home around 7:30. So at 11 o'clock that night, Sharon called Troy's parents because Troy never came home. So they contacted his work, who started like reaching out to the stores that he made deliveries at that day, and one of the stores he stopped at reported him leaving around 2:30 that afternoon, and then the next place he was scheduled to be at said that he never came. Which they thought was weird as well, because he was always like right on schedule, but they did specifically remember like he never came here that day. So Aileen says that he picked her up in his sausage truck and called her a whore and said that he was going to rape her. So she shoots him in typical Aileen fashion, and the bullet hit the main artery of his heart and ricocheted into his left lung. So he turned to try to run, and she shot him in the back again. So she ended up covering his body with palm fronds and stole the money box from inside his truck. So she would later claim that she didn't know there would be so much money in there, but later a guy that she dated in the 80s came forward and said that he drove a sausage truck and that he told her all of the delivery guys had a lot of money on them. So there's some speculation that maybe she targeted this sausage truck because she knew that this company carried boxes of money with them.
Yeah. Because I'm assuming if they're, like, delivering, back then you probably pick up the money, like, when you deliver it and then take it back at the end of the day, because they didn't really have, like, good credit card system. Yeah.
So she drove off in the sausage truck, which, do you not think you're going to get caught in a sausage truck, Aileen? Like, this isn't a random car that's not easily identifiable. Like, you stole a sausage truck.
It's very recognizable. It's very... People know who's supposed to be driving that truck, like, in the company. And you're probably not one of them.
I don't think you're one of them. But it did run out of gas shortly after she took it, and so she left it on the side of the road. So after his family and friends backtracked his route that day and weren't able to find the truck, Sharon reported him missing at 2 a.m. and bolos were issued. It says around 2 a.m., and I don't know if this is the same time that she reported him missing and they just didn't make the connection until later, or if it's 2 a.m. the next day, because it didn't really specify. But around 2 a.m., police found Troy's truck along his route, but in the wrong direction. And there was no evidence of foul play, so the company was allowed to take the truck with them, just immediately.
They're like, we can't lose money on this truck. We gotta get
it back. Like, we need our truck back. We got another sausage route over here. So the family obviously was very angry because they didn't, like, check for fingerprints or anything. They just released the truck right back to the company. But I guess Sharon and Troy had been having some issues in their marriage, so she's starting to worry that maybe he just ran off and left her. And he supposedly had a girlfriend that was down south on one of his routes, so she didn't know if maybe he just left to go be with her. So a man was reported hanging out near the truck earlier that day, and police were able to track him down, and he described a woman that he had seen hitchhiking with the man driving the sausage truck. And so he helped police create another composite. So Aileen and Tyra are just doing their thing. They keep fighting because Aileen refused to get a steady job and leave the sex work industry. And Tyra would later say, quote, "I didn't really have any feelings for her. I was afraid of her, and I just stayed around her because of fear, I guess."
I don't really know how much I believe that.
No.
Like,
I don't.
You could have, what I think is she had herself somebody who was paying for her to stay, paying for her to eat, and she'd be hungry sometimes or whatever, but she'd always get her alcohol, and she didn't want to give that up because she sometimes worked, but I'm pretty sure most of the time she didn't have a job.
Yeah, it was very inconsistent. Yeah. So they, at one point, moved out of their apartment, and they stayed with a friend for the month of August for this year, and then they moved into another hotel. So their friend Sandy helped them move into the hotel and remembered noticing a few men's briefcases in their belongings, which maybe she didn't think anything of it at the time, but obviously later she'll be like, oh, whoops, that was important. So on August 4th, a couple were out sightseeing and looking for a place to picnic when they stumbled upon the body of Troy Burress. And he was still wearing a shirt with his name on it, which for some reason just, like, felt so eerie to me, I guess. Like,
definitely.
I don't know. And it was actually about 3 miles from where his family had been searching earlier that day. So obviously they've continued to search this whole time. And the book that I read said that they were, like, about to go search in the woods, and the police had suspicions that there was something, and they were like, no, we don't need you to go out there, and, like, his body was found that day. So his family could have been the ones to find his, at this point, pretty decomposed body.
Yeah.
So the family says that they don't think that he was likely to pick up a hitchhiker, and it was also against the company's policy to do so, but they were like, well, he may not have been able to resist, like, helping a woman in need, which we kind of talked about in last week's episode, that it's much different than picking up a random man on the side of the street, especially in this time. It's like, oh, this is just a woman who needs help. And okay, I'm not supposed to pick up hitchhikers, but you're in the same direction I'm going, like, sure, I'll give you a ride. It's not really out of the realm of possibility. So the autopsy would reveal a blood alcohol level of 0.08. And so the family was, like, shocked because they're like, it's during the workday, like, he wouldn't have been drinking, this makes no sense. And apparently it was not addressed in court, but blood alcohol levels are not accurate post-mortem. So I did look this up, and this is true. Mm-hmm. So I guess if you test a body for alcohol levels a while after the body is deceased, who knows what kind of level that you're going to get because of, like, the decomposing process that takes place.
Yeah, because, like, your body's going through, like, a lot of things, so it might just be releasing some toxic whatever shit. So
yeah, that's just not accurate, which I thought was crazy that they didn't even bring that up in court. So in court it was addressed that he did have alcohol in his system, which could skew the story of what happened, you know?
And I feel like that would almost be like a point for Aileen.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So I'm
because
like, why would you present? I don't know. That's...
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that happen in the trial that I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah. So on September 2nd, so again, remember, all of this is now happening in the span of, like, one summer. So this is happening pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So September 2nd, Aileen calls a hotel where Tyra is working in the laundry room, and so she has to speak to her, and the bellman won't put her through because he says there's a new policy about personal phone calls. So he's like, sorry, I can't let you talk to her. Like, we're not allowed to take personal calls anymore. So Aileen just keeps hanging up and calling again and again until he finally puts her through. And so Aileen tells Tyra that this man was mean to her. So Tyra confronts the bellman and threatens him, and he tells their boss, who fires Tyra the next day. So Tyra then beats her boss up, physically assaults him.
That's always the way to solve issues.
That's how you do it. Yeah, and I left this in because I think it points to either Tyra's involvement or Tyra's change in behavior since meeting Aileen, that this is how she would respond to this situation when people who knew her report that she would have never done something like this before. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was kind of important to include this incident. And Aileen also threatened that she had put a hit on this boss to kill him. So the boss did file 2 police reports about both of these incidences. Incidents? Incidences? That's not a word, is it?
Incidences doesn't sound right.
Nope. Okay. Just gonna leave that in. It's fine. So on September 6th, police happened to see the sketches from the witness who was found near the sausage truck, and the sketches of the women who were seen leaving after Peter's car was crashed, and they're like, one of these women looks similar. So remember, in the sausage truck it was just Aileen, but with Peter's car it was Aileen and Tyra. But they see, this person looks kind of the same, maybe maybe we got something going on here. And so they start interviewing witnesses around the car crash, and at this time is when they find and speak with the family that came out and spoke to them. So they're able to kind of describe in detail what the women looked like, the conversation they had with them, their panicked nature of trying to immediately leave and then saying like, oh no, I'll get my dad, and then getting in the car and taking off. So now they know there's definitely some suspicious things going on there, if you didn't already know that from the fact that they were in the car of a man who's missing.
Yeah.
So now we have a man named Charles Richard Humphreys who went by Dick. So Dick was 56 years old. He had been married to his wife Shirley for actually 30 years. They celebrated their 30th anniversary the day before he went missing.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know. Like, oh, yeah. So they had 3 children, Elizabeth, Terry Ann, and Charles Michael. So they were 32, 25, and 22.
So they had a kid before they got married?
Maybe it was their 35th anniversary. Yeah, I think it was 35, actually. I think I got that wrong.
My bad.
So, my bad. I don't know. A long time. So Dick grew up in Detroit, and he spent 4 years in the Navy and started a bachelor's degree in police administration at Michigan State. And so Dick and Shirley met at a New Year's Eve party in 1954 and got married 9 months later. So it had to have been 35 years because there's no time to have a baby who got married 9 months after you met. So he graduated in 1960 and decided that he wanted to become a patrolman because he wanted to work like on the street level. So he worked in Ann Arbor. Like I said, they had the 3 kids. He joined the Air Force where he stayed for 20 years and eventually got a master's degree in business administration from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. And he also worked as an adjunct professor at Park College in Missouri. So he retired in November of 1981. At some point, he was a police chief in Alabama. My book wasn't really clear about the timeline for that. But at the time that he disappeared, he was a child custody investigator for the Health and Rehabilitative Services in Florida, which is now called the Department of Children and Families. So like a CPS type job.
Yeah.
So on September 11th, Dick usually got home from work around 6:10. And so by 8 o'clock, when he had not arrived, his wife Shirley called Highway Patrol, and he was scheduled to start a new position in a different office as a community control worker the next day. So his office reports that he had left work around 2:30 that afternoon to check on a medical examination report, and that he wasn't scheduled to come back to the office. So of course police start looking for him immediately because he was a former police officer, instead of making her wait more than 2 hours like they do with everyone else. I don't know if your book had a lot of details about his actual murder. Mine didn't really include anything about Aileen's story, just that she did shoot him 7 times. So I assume she had her usual claim of, we pulled off to have sex and I thought he was going to rape me, but it didn't really specify.
I'm not sure because there were so many victims, so I don't want to like misspeak and then have it a different story. For another one, I don't remember if it went too in detail about it. Like the book went really in detail about Richard, and then after that it was kind of a little bit shorter for the rest of them. So okay. And I'm guessing that, so like I said, for this one we had a ton of information about his background, and I'm guessing that's just because the family spoke with the author of this book versus some of the other victims maybe didn't want to share too much. So that's why it's kind of inconsistent with the amount of information we have about each victim. Like I said, during this time, Aileen and Tyra are living at kind of various hotels, and the owners of one of them remember between September 12th and 18th, by looking at their like registration records, they were able to kind of piece together the date. Around that time, they remembered Aileen showing up with a 1985 blue Oldsmobile that had the license plates removed. So this would be later found out to be Dick's car. And Tyra again saw on the news that a man had been murdered, and they showed a picture of his car, which was this car. So now Tyra knows that Aileen has definitely killed again. So this is the 3rd victim that Tyra for sure knows about. And I mean, you can kind of assume she knows about the rest of them, but at this point, these 3 she should definitely know.
Yeah, there's no questioning it at this point. So on September 12th, a couple of teenagers discovered Dick's body on the side of the road. So police check on missing persons, which of course Dick is on there already. And so a colleague actually identified his body shortly before midnight, and his wife was notified around 1 a.m. And the autopsy showed 7 bullet wounds, with the deadly bullet being the one to the back of the head. So on September 17th, police from several counties meet again to compare all of these cases that are starting to look really similar. These middle-aged white men killed with a .22 caliber gun, all shot in the chest region, had been robbed, bodies left in deserted areas, away from their cars, most of them found naked. And then they again discussed the theory that they believe a woman could be responsible, especially because the families of several victims reported that they would never pick up hitchhikers, so they didn't think that they were, quote, easy targets. I just put that in quotes because I didn't really like that phrase, but just to kind of get at the gist of, they're like, oh, there's usually these big, strong, burly men, they would never let themselves, quote, be victim to something like this. So they're like, well, maybe it makes sense that a woman is doing this because these men would be more likely to help this, like, damsel in distress kind of person.
Yeah, and I was, like, talking to Kevin about it, because we watched the movie Monster with Charlize Theron, which kind of similar. They do take some liberties and change a few things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fake. It's not a fake movie, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I was talking, and I was like, oh yeah, well, like this one, like in the book, it really says like that they were just like off the road and they don't understand. He was like why would you drive off the road? And I'm like, okay, but also you have to think, like, what if she just pulled her gun out and was like, drive this way?
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna do it. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And like, just because like. And I don't know if that happened, but I'm like, I could see that happening if these men are not men who are, like, wanting to have sex or wanting to do drugs with her. Uh-huh. She just, like, pulls out her gun and she's like, hey, go drive over there. Like, you're going to listen because you don't want to die. Like,
yeah, they're like, okay, I can't imagine that she's randomly going to kill me. She's probably just trying to rob me and steal my vehicle. So she's like, drive far away, then I'm just going to leave you here. And they're like, okay, sure, fine, go right ahead.
Yeah, because in the movie, there was one of them, I think they probably were assuming this one was Peter, who was like just trying to help her and was just like, please don't shoot me, I have a family, please don't like take anything you want, just please leave me, like stuff like that, which again, it's a fake movie, but I could see that happening for sure.
Yeah. And according to this book, which I couldn't find any information online that confirms this, but supposedly men are more likely to murder someone by shooting them in the head, and women are more likely to murder someone by shooting them in the chest. Again, couldn't find anything else to substantiate this, but I was like, okay, well, if this is something they thought at the time, this was important to their investigation, so I thought I would include that. But Aileen apparently just shot people all over the place, so...
Yeah, I don't think she was aiming. I think she was just like...
She was just going. So they call in the FBI to consult, who does confirm that this is likely a serial killer, and at this point they've never coined anyone as a female serial killer. So this is the first person to meet the definition, if it is a woman, which they're starting to suspect that it is, and females didn't usually kill strangers, so very unusual for a mass murderer to murder strangers. Usually when we hear history of like female, quote, serial killers, it's I murdered a bunch of kids, I was an angel of death in a nursing home, and I murdered some old people. It was never really just random strangers.
Yeah, my book had some statistics about, like, what percentage of women kill and what percentage of that is, like, people they know, like, not strangers. And I wish I'd written that down because I don't remember. But it was, like, significant where it's, like, it's very rare to have, like, an Aileen situation here.
Yes, which murdering strangers is rare anyway, but even more so with a female. Yeah. So on September 19th, Dick's car was located 125 miles north of where his body was found, and it was abandoned at a service station. So Aileen, of course, had tossed all of his belongings before leaving the car, but a beer or wine receipt was found on the floorboard under one of the pedals. So they were able to trace it to a Speedway, which is like a gas station, truck stop, convenience store type thing, if you aren't familiar with Speedways. And it was dated on September 11th at 4:19 p.m. So this is the day that Dick went missing, and he had left his office around 2:30 that day. So an assistant police chief did confirm that Dick came over to speak with him about the medical examination report sometime after 2:30 that day. We just know that was the time he left his office. The police chief couldn't confirm the exact time that he came by. But a 28-year-old woman named Gail, who was a woman on Dick's caseload, said that he stopped by her house to see her between 3:10 and 3:30 or so. So Gail said that he seemed nervous when he was there and that he left a few minutes after he got there, saying that he was looking for some people and had the wrong address, which is kind of weird because this was a woman on his caseload, so did you not know where she lived? I don't know, but... So, an employee of a motel close to the Speedway where the beer or the wine was purchased called to say that she thought that she had seen Dick the day that he disappeared. So she said that he was pacing up and down the halls of the hotel, and he made a call from the payphone. And his office does report that a call came in from him around 3:45 that day, just making sure that no one needed him, that he didn't need to come back to the office for anything. The hotel clerk reports that around 4 p.m. he showed her his ID, which is how she knows for sure that it was this man, and identified himself as an employee of the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services and asked who owned the car outside with the sleeping child inside. So the hotel clerk said that it was her child, that she could see him, but he's like, no, you need to go get your child. He can't be sleeping alone in the car outside. So this incident is only important because they know for sure that he was at this hotel at 4 p.m., pacing and making a phone call, and no one is really sure why.
Yeah.
This may have nothing to do with his murder, but it is kind of important to the story. She says that he then left and went to McDonald's, and he never came back, and he never booked a room there. So on October 22nd, police were able to pull a finger and palm print from some blood that was on the handle of Peter's car door. So remember, this is the car that Aileen and Tyra crashed. So a bottle of Windex with an Eckerd's store sticker and a can of Busch Light was found under the seat. So the Windex led them to a store in Atlanta, Georgia. And so at this point, the cops do have a composite sketch of the two women that were found leaving Peter's car. So they take that with them to this store in Atlanta, Georgia. The clerk says that he did remember them because, in his words, this was a bad part of town in a predominantly black neighborhood. Again, his words.
Yeah.
But he said that it was very rare for white people to come into this store, especially at night, so that's why he, specifically remembers them. And he says he remembers them buying cosmetics and Trojan condoms, which were the same brand that were found near David's body and in his car. But Aileen claims that she only drove to Atlanta once, and that was with Peter. So this raised a lot of questions of, okay, so was Tyra in on... Does she know way more than she claims to know? Was she with them at the time that he disappeared?
Yeah.
So that's just an interesting little thing to consider. And on October 23rd, police interviewed the cashier who worked at the Speedway the day that Dick went missing. And so she said that two women came in. She confirmed that the composite sketch looked like them. She says that she remembers them specifically because she was responsible for sending the sex workers away from the store, which is just kind of an interesting job duty for a cashier at a Speedway.
I know, I always but... you know how you have your okay, this is what you need to get done today. It's right, clean the bathroom, count the money, get the sex workers away.
Check. All right, moving on. Which I guess it makes sense if it's this busy truck stop, and so you have kind of transient people in and out, and they're like, hey, can you just kind of keep the sex workers away?
Yeah, I know a lot of them frequent truck stops because that's a good spot or whatever. So
especially for Aileen who hitchhikes. I mean, that's the place to get someone to give you a ride. So she says that they checked her work schedule, and she was able to determine that they came in around 5 o'clock that day. But when shown a picture of Dick, the cashier says that she does not remember seeing a man that looked like that. So Aileen's seventh and final victim is Walter Gino Antonio. So he was a trucker who doubled as a reserve police officer. So on November 17th, he was driving to Alabama in search of a job, and he had been recently engaged and was wearing a gold and silver diamond ring that was a gift from his fiancée. And when Aileen returned to Florida after Thanksgiving, she gave Tyra this ring. So on November 18th, a police officer who was out hunting found a man's body that was naked except for the socks, and he had been shot 4 times, 3 in the torso and 1 in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. Now, on November 19th, the car of Curtis, who went by Corky Reed, was found in an Orlando parking lot. And Corky had gone missing back on September 7th. So he worked for a company that serviced NASA, and he disappeared on a payday. So they're like, it's kind of interesting. He said he was having dinner with a buddy from work in Cocoa Beach and never returned home. So at the time, his mom was currently dying of emphysema, and she did end up passing away before his car was found in November. And he also had a sister who had cancer. So, like, I don't think he would just up and take off. Like, this doesn't make any sense to us. And the license plate had been removed from his car, and they found a blonde hair in the car with the seat pulled all the way up.
Yeah, and there is speculation. The book I read, which was The Monster by Aileen Wuornos and the co-author, so mostly by the co-author, was talking about this one, and he kind of, I guess, asked Aileen about each of the people, and there'd be a quote from her at the beginning of each chapter, and on this one, all it said was, "Who the fuck is that guy?" So, and yes. I also know it said in the book, like, when they found his car, his sister was like, okay, and then just, like, drove it home.
Oh.
Like, it was a very weird scenario, like, set of circumstances happening with this one.
Yes, so we'll get back to this one, but in the sake of trying to keep with our timeline of what's happening when, I just wanted to include that car was found in November. So on November 24th, Walter's car was found, and he always recorded the mileage of his car on his gas receipts, so they were easily able to tell that the car had been driven over 1,000 miles in the week since he disappeared.
That's a lot.
Yeah, like, I don't know what she was doing, but she was going to a whole bunch of places. And again, Aileen removed the license plate like she does, but she also covered the VIN number with paper this time.
It cracks me up because
getting smarter.
I think they said it was like the flimsiest, crappiest piece of paper it was covered with, and it's like,
they're just like, I'll just rip this off.
Take it off. Thank you.
But I guess she was following the news and was like, oh, okay, this is how they're finding it out, so I'll just take care of that. And his ID and clothing were found in a wooded area, but there was some other stuff that his fiancée said that he had with him, including the ring that was not found when they found his car. So the Ocala Star-Banner had run a piece in the newspaper about the murders, suggesting that there might be a serial killer, but it was overshadowed at the time by the Gainesville student murders that had happened in August, which, FYI, was the string of murders that was the basis for the Scream franchise. So,
which we'll have to do that.
Yes, I love the Scream franchise, which, side note, apparently they're about to do Scream 5, and
Ooh.
Literally right before we started recording this, my brother sent me a link to an article that says that they're planning on killing Sydney in the very beginning, and I was like, whoa, what? We can't. Anyway, so, but the newspaper was nervous to publicize it too much because they were afraid that the perpetrators might flee. So they're like, they're going to see that someone's looking for them, and so they're going to take off. So they were kind of hesitant to put too much out there. So on November 29th, they did finally decide to release the composite sketches of the two women to media throughout the state. So tips just started flooding in. Of course, many of them were wild goose chases, as they typically are in high-profile cases like this, but they're starting to kind of get some repeat names. And obviously, Aileen and Tyra stuck out to a lot of people because they were lesbians, they roamed the state, kind of staying in various hotels with friends, just kind of transient people that you remember, you know? They either had no money or they had tons of money, and they always had a random assortment of goods with them, especially when they would like move from one place to another, just a bunch of oddball objects that kind of stuck out to people. As we mentioned before, Aileen did use a variety of aliases, so her name specifically was not coming up at this time, but Tyra Moore became one of the names that came in repeatedly, and then they would have some other names like Eileen's sister Lori, that she used her name. There was a lady named Sandy, another lady named Sandra, so lots of names that she went by.
Yeah, a Cammie, I think it was. Cammie, yeah, it was another one.
Yes, Cammie Green was one of Tyra's friends that she was living with at the time that she met Aileen.
Yeah, and I think like Aileen was like pissed at her and was like, I'm taking your ID, goodbye.
Yes, which Aileen tend to do quite a bit. So Tyra claims that she left for Ohio on December 3rd, but it's kind of difficult to confirm exactly when she left. But basically she's like, I'm getting stressed out, I need to get out of here. And also, Tyra did go home to Ohio for Thanksgiving and then returned back to Florida. So that's going to come up later where she was like, oh, I was scared. I was afraid of her. I didn't know what to do. And it's like, when you guys were on good terms, you left to go home for Thanksgiving and you still came back. Like, you could have just stayed there. But she left again on what she claims was December 3rd, but that's not exactly confirmed. So basically she said that she was just too nervous. Like, the police were releasing these sketches that she's like, I know this is us, like, people are going to find us, like, I need to get out of here. But she did help Aileen move a large number of items, which they would later discover to be items stolen from the men that she murdered, into a storage unit that she rented under the name Cammie Green and the address of one of her former clients. So then on December 11th, Chuck Carskadon's mom called the tip line because her son had gone missing and they still haven't found his body. It's been a couple of months. And she's like, hey, I see that you have a couple of other murders that are like the similar type.
Like the same MO.
Like demographic. Yeah. And so she's like, you can identify him by a wire in his jaw. And so the detective that she spoke with knew another detective on the task force had found a John Doe with a wire in his jaw. So they did end up positively identifying him as Chuck the next day. So we've now officially found the body of Chuck as well. So on December 13th, Aileen met up with the sister of a guy that she knew and told the sister that her husband had just died and she had to pawn all of her belongings for food and money, and she had nowhere to go. And so the woman, whose name was Virginia, offered her cabin, which was south of Cocoa Beach. But when she returned to the cabin on December 19th, Aileen had moved out and stolen her jewelry as well as her passport, birth certificate, and ID. Again, which Aileen liked to do. But this lady wouldn't notice that her identification was missing for more than a year. And my book didn't get into how she finally came to discover that, just that she didn't know it for a year.
Yeah, like, I understand the passport and the birth certificate, because mine are currently, like, just in my house, and I don't check them regularly to see if they're there. Yeah. But my ID, right. I feel like, I mean, unless you didn't have to show ID as much at this time, I don't know. I feel like that's something I need frequently.
If maybe it was like an older ID that she like had a new one and she still had the old one laying around. And, you know, if it's expired and people don't really check expiration dates, like when they check ID, maybe that's true Aileen was able to get away with it. I don't know. So America's Most Wanted did run a story which received more than 900 tips after the story ran. And so on December 21st, the police ran the repeat suspect names, which included Tyra Moore, Susan Blahovic, which was one of Tyra's friends, and Cammie Marsh Green, which we said was another one of Tyra's friends that we know Aileen stole her identification. So they ran those names through the Volusia computerized pawn shop records. So Volusia County required anyone selling to pawn shops to record a transaction with a thumbprint. If you'll remember, that came up way back with Richard, that when Aileen pawned his items, she had to put her thumbprint on there. And so the name Cammie Marsh Green showed up several times. So a few days after Richard's murder, quote, Cammie had pawned the camera and the radar detector that were the specific items that Richard's ex-girlfriend said that he would have had on him at the time that he was murdered. So they were able to match the fingerprint of, quote, Cammie to Lori Grody, who was arrested in Volusia County for carrying a concealed firearm. So again, just they're getting there, but slowly but surely with all of Eileen's aliases, which I guess in the 90s you could get arrested with an alias and get away with it, which is just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I see with like my background checks, like people who have aliases that are like completely different names, and I'm like, how did you get away with that? But I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess I really don't know.
Yeah, seems odd in this time, and they also matched it to the bloody prints that were left on Peter's car. And so eventually, as they keep digging, they find the same print that is a match to an Aileen Wuornos, who was arrested several years before. And so they're finally starting to like put this together. Okay, there's one person with this one set of prints that is using all these different names. So we just need to find out where this one person is. And the ring that was stolen from Walter Gino Antonio was confirmed to be pawned by Eileen's fingerprints using Cammie's ID on December 7th. So flight records would show that Tyra flew to Pittsburgh on November 17th and back to Daytona on November 25th, like we said, for Thanksgiving, which maybe gives her an alibi for the Antonio murder. Because again, it's going to come up later of whether or not she was involved, which even if she didn't physically do it, you know, she knew about them. But this one, it's like, okay, she most likely didn't have anything to do with this one because she was out of state. Even though that is a long time frame, so she clearly could have driven down there and driven back up, but, you know.
Yes, so then detectives go to Ohio because they're like, we need to research Tyra. And they believe she'd probably return there for Christmas as well. And so they looked at her school records, but they didn't really find any evidence of any psychological or behavior problems. She was just kind of a C student who later transferred to a vocational school. Her father was an industrious carpenter and a bricklayer, and her mother had died when she was a toddler, and her father married Marianne. She did have 3 brothers and a sister, and they really were trying to go slow and careful with this one. They don't really have enough to arrest Aileen just yet, and they're like, we don't want Tyra to know that we're looking at her, tip her off. Like, we're trying to keep everything quiet right now. And so, while they didn't have enough to arrest her for the current murder charges, she could be picked up on a previous warrant because we all know that Aileen was in a lot of trouble using aliases, skipping bail. I'm sure she had a warrant out for something at all times. So they're like, we can do something. But at the time, neither the Florida Supreme Court nor the United States Supreme Court had ruled on whether or not you could question a subject detained for one crime about another crime. And they're like, okay, but we don't want these confessions to be tossed out in court. So they're really trying to think forward to this trial. We're like, cannot mess anything up. We cannot ruin this. And they also felt that her and Tyra should be arrested at the same time in different states as they were believed to be accomplices. So they're like, we don't want them getting together, destroying evidence, coming up with a story, all that. So they did end up getting approved for a wiretap for Tyra's phone and mail surveillance. And they wanted to speak with Susan Balavec, the real one, not the Aileen one.
Not the Aileen one.
So that was a woman who Aileen had stolen her ID, and she was ticketed for a traffic violation under. And they had to be careful because they're like, well, we also don't know if she just like gave Aileen the ID. Like, is she in on it too? Like, we don't really know. She knew someone had stolen her ID because on one of those tickets she got, she was trying to prove like I was not in Florida at the time of this traffic violation. I was in Ohio. It couldn't have been me. She had briefly lived in a campground with her husband in Florida, but they did separate, and she left before Aileen and Tyra moved in, and her ex-husband then gave them her ID, which kind of a dick move. Like,
right? Like, why would you do that?
Like, it's so random. It's again just like the 90s and IDs. They're just like leaving their IDs everywhere.
Yeah, you could have it. It's fine. I don't need this one.
It's so weird, like, thinking back, because it's like so many times I have to show my ID all the time. So
right?
It's so weird thinking, like, I don't know, it's just gone. So Aileen Wuornos was officially spotted and placed under surveillance at 9:19 p.m. on Thursday, January 8th, 1991, at the Port Orange pub Undercover. There was supposed to be a period there. But the U was capitalized, so I was like, okay, just keep reading.
The Port Orange Undercover bar.
Okay. All I can think of is, like, Anchorman when he just reads whatever's on the prompt. Like, he doesn't even think about what it says. Okay. At the Port Orange pub. So, undercover cops did go in and out of different bars in the area trying to find her. They used cell phones, which were super new, like a super new thing. They're super fancy, instead of radio communication. So the local news hopefully wouldn't pick up this information and run it.
Yeah.
Because we know sometimes the local news stations can really mess some stuff up. And then undercover detective Mike Joyner had started a conversation with her. He's like playing pool. And then 2 local uniform cops come in and arrest her. So a tip had been called into local police by someone who had previously reported Aileen and Tyra, letting them know, like, Aileen was at this bar. So they grilled her over her ID because it didn't look like her. She didn't know the date of birth. She said she was between addresses. So they called the station and able to get info radioed into these cops running the license to stand down. Because I know in my book, like, they were talking about how frustrated they were because they were like, we're trying to be undercover and you're ruining it. Like, stop.
Street cops just walked in and arrested you for using a fake ID, and we're like, we're working on a 7-time murderer over here. Can you just back up for a minute?
Like, we need you to just leave. So they did, and they send her on her way, like, whatever.
Which is good, too, because, you know, sometimes they'll be like, oh, no, this is mine for this little petty crime, and I don't care what your work. And this time they were like, oh, my bad, and they just left.
My bad. So. Yeah. So she goes back in, she's playing pool with this undercover detective, talked about missing her girlfriend, Tyra, you know, they just broke up. So he would go to the bathroom shortly after getting a new drink, dump it out, fill it with water, so that he was sober but kind of seemed drunk. He was just kind of playing it.
Which I thought was super smart, because, like, I never would have thought of something like that, because he's like, well, obviously she's going to notice if, like, she keeps getting drinks and I'm, like, still drinking the same one, so he just kept buying more drinks and then would just dump the whole thing out and fill it with water and pretend to drink it. I'm like, wow, that's really smart.
Yeah. It's good idea for sure. So she asked for a ride, but he said he had somewhere to be, because he's probably like, I can't put you in my undercover car.
He's like, nope.
But he said he had somewhere to be, as he was given direct orders, like, do not let her in the car. Yep. So he left, and she walked from the bar down the street, and she slept on the porch of that bar for the night. And then Detective Joyner found her at the bar the next day and was kind of surprised to see her. So this time his partner, Martin, had a wire. And apparently they kept playing Digging Up Bones by Travis on the jukebox. So people started talking about a big party planned at the bar that night. And they wanted to avoid, like, watching Aileen with a large group of people. Mm-hmm. And so Joyner offered to buy her a hotel room for the night because she told them her friend had stolen all of her money and she had nowhere to go. And said she was going to shower at the hotel and he should pick her up around, like, 7 to 8 that night. So Joyner yelled through his truck that he needed directions to the motel, and she walked towards him, and then the police swarmed her. And I just want to add that one of the bars she was at was called The Last Resort.
Oh, wow.
Like, one of the last bars she was at was called The Last Resort. So I just think that's kind of funny, because it's, like, pretty kind of ironic there a little bit. Yeah. So police swarmed her. They placed her under arrest just after 5 p.m. They handcuffed undercover Joyner because they don't want to blow his cover while they ran his information. They didn't really run it.
Courtney's doing air quotes that you can't see because this is a podcast.
Joyner was wired for audio and video and asked Aileen what was going on, but she cussed at him and told him to keep his mouth shut. She's like, this isn't my first rodeo. Shut up.
Right.
Don't talk. So they told her, like, you're being arrested for this outstanding warrant from 1986 for grand theft and carrying a concealed firearm. And inside the suitcase she was carrying, they found a few knives and a receipt for a storage unit rented in Daytona under Cammie Green. And she was super, super protective over a key on her. And she was like, you can't lose it. It's very important. I need this key. It does end up this key was the storage unit. Mm-hmm. And they're like, okay, we won't lose it.
Yep, nope. I'll hang on to that.
So there was a female detective who was undercover named Karen Collins. She was placed in the holding cell posing as being arrested for aggravated battery. So they begin chatting about what they're in there for, you know, as girls do.
Courtney knows all about that jail room chatter.
And Collins says she shot someone. So that got Aileen talking about her arrest for the concealed weapon and her experience with guns, because I'm sure Aileen just wanted to brag. And then she told her the key was to a storage unit that had, like, all of her life's possessions in it, and because she's now broke and homeless and she doesn't have anywhere to go. And she told Collins that she feared they suspected her of being the serial killer murdering the men on the interstate. Which I think we've seen in the past. Usually if someone's like,
yep,
I didn't murder all those men.
Like, we haven't even talked to you about these men yet. Why do you think that that's what you're here for?
Yeah, and, like, they told her, like, it's just for this outstanding warrant. We just found you. And then she's like, I didn't murder those men. Like, what? So on January 11th, they did speak with Tyra's dad, who finally agreed to give police her phone number. So the phone number traced to Swoyersville, Pennsylvania, and they found that the address was to her sister Twyla. And A little fun fact, they do say Twyla lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So hi, all my Office fans. I wonder if she worked at a paper company. But, so Tyra was at work and she was placed into protective custody of the state police and said she would only talk to the Florida authorities. I don't know why, but that was her stipulation. Her family was interviewed, and Tracy, which was the sister who had visited Tyra with Aileen, was describing her summer in Florida and the blue car, which we do know is Peter's car, that Aileen showed up with. So Tyra is not under arrest, but she is read her Miranda rights and agrees to an interview. She told the police about Aileen confessing to murdering a man in December of 1989 and said that they used his car to move their belongings into their new apartment. And she remembered that there was a maroon briefcase brought home, and she somehow remembered its combination. I don't know how you would remember that.
Yeah, I don't know about that part, but that's what it said.
It's kind of weird. Maybe she was just really good with numbers. Maybe. But those numbers did end up being the first 6 digit of Dick's social security number. Yeah. So, and she talked about how Aileen would just bring multiple cars home for a few days and then return them, and how these cars keep coming in and out. She did give the police the briefcase and a few other stolen items Aileen had given her, and Tyra tells the police Aileen had tossed her .22 caliber revolver into the Rose Bay. So Tyra is singing like a canary here.
She's like, here you go. Here's all the information.
And so she does agree to go to Florida to meet with police there. And so they fly her down, and on the flight there, the detective asked her to list every address they lived at between 1989 and 1990. Tyra agreed to speak to Aileen while being recorded to try to elicit a confession. So Tyra called and left a message and had to wait for Aileen to decide if she wanted to call back or not. And Tyra said that she went to Pennsylvania to hide out because she's afraid of Aileen. But like Jaclyn said, she went up to Ohio or Pennsylvania, wherever, for Thanksgiving. And then she came back down, and then she's going back to Pennsylvania. So it's like, well, if you were that scared in the first place, why did you ever return?
Yeah, because she only came back for a week and a half before she left again, so...
Yeah, and especially if they, don't have money. How are you getting money to fly or take a bus or whatever you're doing? But she said, I will cooperate fully. I'll do whatever you want. And police are really starting to doubt her as a murderer and think she just had knowledge of the crimes. So if Tyra did have something to do with it, she's getting lucky and she's playing them real good.
Right.
Because, and so the police also do kind of start to see signs of an abusive relationship with Tyra as the victim and Aileen really abusing her. Which we know Aileen probably never saw any example of a healthy relationship in her life. Yeah. So it would not surprise me at all if this was an unhealthy relationship. Yeah. Because that's all she's ever seen and known, and that to her is love.
Which, I just have to give a little aside here about the book that I read, which was written in the year 2000, and it has a lot of outdated terminology and viewpoints, especially in the way that they talk about sex work and the LGBT community. And there was this one quote that I sent to Courtney that I was just like, wow, we've come a long way in the last 20 years, because it was something along the lines of, it was almost like an abusive husband and his submissive wife. And I'm like, no, you can have an abusive lesbian relationship too without comparing it to a man.
It doesn't have to be compared to a heterosexual relationship. Yeah,
it was just such a weird
relationship.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to toss that out. I had a lot of issues with some of the choices made in the book that I read.
Yeah, Sue Russell does not seem to... And I mean, I understand Aileen did a lot of terrible things, but she clearly had no sympathy for her upbringing, had no belief that Aileen could ever tell the truth.
And it wasn't written objectively either. The facts were there, but the author would also give her, well, Aileen said this, whatever. She literally said whatever in the book.
Literally said whatever.
Yeah, when describing, what Eileen's version of something was. And it's okay, if you're writing a true crime book, you can just put all the facts out there. Most people are going to hate Aileen just based on the facts. You don't have to give your input as well.
And that's the thing, too. I feel like so much of lying in general comes from truth. Mm-hmm. So even if Aileen is lying a million different ways, a million different times, there probably is some truth somewhere in there. So I feel like it is important to report it because it's well, maybe, it's...
One of them has the truth wrapped up in it somehow, basically.
Yeah. But
sorry for my little aside. Anyway, continue.
So on January 14th, they obtained a search warrant for the storage unit, and it was just full of just random assortments of everyday items, Susan's identifying documents, and Richard Mallory's camera, which was the most identifiable item. So Aileen did end up calling Tyra back on this afternoon, and Aileen is saying how she's so pissed that they think they're the women robbing and killing men. She's gonna sue them. She just can't believe it. She tells Tyra the storage unit is gone, has been taken care of. I don't know why she thought that. I lost the key. It's taken care of. Don't worry.
Nope, that's not how that works, Aileen.
So Tyra is like being like, I really don't want my life ruined because of something you did. I saw the news. I remember the cars. And Aileen, this whole time is like, is somebody listening to you? Like, is somebody there with you? Mm-hmm. Like, what's going on? And she's like, I know that we didn't do anything, and those cars were just borrowed from friends. Like, don't let them tell you anything else. Like, it's just what I told you to begin with. I don't know. And Tyra's like, but you told me that you killed 2 men. And Eileen's like, I was just bullshitting. I was just saying whatever.
You know, like you do when you just make up that you murdered someone that day for small talk.
Yeah, you know, you're just laying in bed after having a little intimacy time, and you're like, by the way, killed a man today. How's your day, honey? Like, so, and Aileen says, like, my fingerprints are in a lot of guys' cars. Like, I'm a sex worker. I get in men's cars. Mm-hmm. Like, and they're going to try to pin the murders on her if they do find her fingerprints in one of the dead guys' cars. And then Aileen did call again later and said she didn't think the prints were in the car they wrecked, and to do her a favor and keep her mouth shut. So, but she also did keep repeatedly asking if someone was Tyra and was suspicious they were being recorded. So I don't really know why she kept talking.
No.
Because, like, I think they said she heard, like, the tick or whatever of, like, the recording or something. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, is this being recorded? Oh, by the way, that car that we wrecked, that was that dead man's. Don't worry, I think we're good on it. Like, it's not very logical. Yeah. But this is Aileen. She wasn't logical.
She wasn't very logical, no.
And then she called again and asked if her sister had said anything to police. And she called another time and was like, Tyra, just go home. Don't worry with everything. You're making it worse. Just go home. Then the next morning, Aileen calls really early and she tells Tyra, like, hey, I got rid of that pistol I had. And she makes references to Tyra getting some crystal balls out of their storage unit. So Aileen just continues to call Tyra several times over the next few days. And Tyra... go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to add real quick. Like, in the book that I read, it talked about... Because it had, like, pretty much full transcripts of these tapes. Like, this went on for, like, 2 chapters.
Yeah, my book did, too.
Yeah. But it was talking about how, like, the crystal balls were supposed to, like, symbolize something. It sounded like, to the police, like, that she was very, like... Hey, make sure you go get those crystal balls. Wink, wink. Just get the crystal balls. Wink, wink. So... I don't know what was up with them, but they said that it was very, like, intentional that she was telling her to get this, whatever it may have, like, represented.
Yeah. Oh, so Tyra also was just like, hey, I really need to go back to Ohio. They're questioning my parents. They're questioning my sister. I'm afraid, you know, she's going to get in trouble for something she didn't do. And she asked Aileen, like, why did you do this? And then Eileen's like, it was self-defense. Even though she had just said she didn't do it.
Yeah.
So, and Tyra really is pushing, like, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble. Aileen, like, you have to confess. I'm going to get in trouble. Like, she kept pushing that. So eventually Aileen says, you're not going to get in trouble. Like, I'll confess. So she tells a correctional officer that she needs to speak to her. And in my book, it kind of details this as, like, the correctional officer sits down and Eileen's like, are you a Christian? Like, by the way, I, like, killed all these men. And the correctional officer was like, you know that I have to tell them what you just said to
right?
me.
Like...
And she was like, I know. Like, I know. And the correctional officer said it was like, she wanted someone who maybe, like, because she was Christian, might have, like, sympathy on her, or, like, maybe it'd be, like, a way of, like, clearing her in God's eyes, or something like that, like, some weird thing, but I don't know. But then the correctional officer was like, hey, do you want to go confess? And she's like, okay, yeah, sure, let's go.
Okay.
All right. So they take her to the office of the superintendent of corrections, and they have the detectives on the couple of the cases meet them. So she's read her rights and she asked for a lawyer, but she just keeps talking. And my book had like all the transcripts of these entire things. And honestly, it made my head spin trying to read it.
Yes.
Like, I honestly skimmed through most of it because Aileen just, like, when she talks, speaking of The Office again, like when Michael Scott's like, sometimes I start a sentence and I don't know where it's going.
Yep.
That's Aileen. Like, so
you just can't follow it at all.
Very hard. Yeah. So she just continues talking and they remind her, like, hey, you have the right to remain silent. You can wait for a lawyer, but she just keeps talking. And she continues confessing against the advice of her lawyer after he arrives, which I'm also wondering, because usually, isn't it when they ask for, like, a lawyer, aren't the detectives supposed to leave until the lawyer comes
usually, like, they just, so I don't know if it was, like, a protection thing, that they had to make sure that she wasn't going to harm herself, or...
And I also don't know, since this is, like, the early 90s, if it's different now than it was then.
True.
But I always thought that was kind of weird that they just sat there.
Yeah, they're like,
okay, you want a lawyer? Keep talking.
We'll stay here just in case.
Yeah, and so her lawyer's like, hey, shut up, you're digging yourself a hole, and she just keeps talking. She tells the police the men all started messing with her, and she had to kill them to save herself. She says she couldn't just run away because they might run her over with their truck, or they might shoot her. And admits she didn't know if some had guns or not, and she's like, I don't know if they had a gun, but maybe they did, and maybe they could have shot me. But she said also, like, they might have, can't take any chances. They did ask about Peter Siems, since his body had yet to be located. And she tells them, I dumped it somewhere in Georgia, but I don't remember where. So on January 17th, a dive team does recover Eileen's .22 caliber revolver in a suitcase with a set of handcuffs and a flashlight. It was in the Rose Bay where Tyra told them it was dumped. So the sheriff officially announces Aileen is charged with first-degree murder for Richard Mallory and that additional charges were pending. So this part cracked me up. So they go and tell her sister, Lori, and Lori's like, sounds about right.
Yeah.
Like, she's not surprised being interviewed by the police or to learn that she was a suspect in these, like, murders. One of the few possessions Aileen was arrested with was a letter from her sister written in 1975 with directions to her house. So through many states and houses and being homeless, like, she always had this letter with her.
That, like, broke my heart when I read it, because I'm like, I know Aileen was a monster and did horrible things, but also she was just this broken person who just wanted to belong somewhere. And, like, when I read that part, I was like, oh.
Yeah, and it just truly, like, what would have happened if she'd had different parents, if she'd had different circumstances, even if she'd been born, like, a few decades later and someone noticed her psychological warning sign, could have helped her. But Lori also did believe her sister should die in the electric chair, and I'm not going to help her at all.
Yeah.
So, it did receive very little media attention, which is weird, because this is, like, the first female serial killer.
Yeah.
Rumors were circulating that some of the detectives involved, along with Tyra, were, like, securing a movie deal before the trial even began, and everyone's like, nope, that didn't happen, you're lying. But I also saw multiple places that this did happen.
Yeah.
And that I'm pretty sure these detectives were fired later because of this.
Yeah, and there were, like, documentation, like, of, like, money received, and they're like, oh, no, it wasn't for that, it was for this other thing. So some super sketchy things that probably actually happened, especially considering how many movies have been made about this case and how quickly after. It was probably in the works before the trial.
Yeah. And there was a lady, Jaclyn Garreau, who had secured Eileen's life story rights before January 30th to make a movie, so everyone is, like, jumping on this, like, grabbing this.
This is, like, 2 weeks after she's arrested. This lady gets, like, rights to her whole life story to make a movie, which is crazy.
Yeah, and so some people were outraged that Tyra was not arrested, including me, because, for real, but in Florida law at the time, only having knowledge of a homicide was not a crime. She would have had to have been a part of covering it up or helping Aileen to escape to be charged with a crime, which I feel like you totally could have argued both of those. I mean,
agreed.
She knew that car was somebody's. Like, you're covering it up if you're not telling. Anyway, so one of the detectives claimed he was removed from the investigation so other guys could get the glory. So there's some inter-office issues with all this.
Yep. A lot of drama went down with this case.
Yeah. So, 44-year-old Arlene Perel and her husband Robert did end up adopting Aileen after her arrest. So Arlene originally wrote to Aileen about Jesus, and adoption allowed them to see Aileen face to face during visits, and she defended her, said it was self-defense. Arlene said she loved Aileen more than her husband, which I wonder what her husband thought, like,
right?
Okay. So people did claim that she was in it to get famous and make money, but Arlene said as Aileen's legal parents, I don't know if that's true, because can you legally adopt a 35-year-old? That
was my question, especially if the reason, quote, that she did it was to be able to see her face to face. I'm like, would you legally be considered family? Like, can you legally adopt an adult? I don't know.
I have no idea. But Arlene did say they couldn't profit off of her crimes due to the Son of Sam law. So I did look up the Son of Sam law. So it was enacted in 1977 after David Berkowitz, who was the son of Sam, sold his story for money. And so they made this law to ensure criminals cannot profit from writings or stories or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, that's not fair to the victims and their families to just make money because you killed them. So she did tell some women in jail that she killed the men because they were cheating on their wives. And she did threaten to sharpen her spoon and stab someone at one point. Aileen did claim that inmates filed false reports against her and got her put into segregation, and that was why she was treated cruelly. I don't know if Aileen just wants to be ostracized all the time and makes it that way. Probably. Other inmates claim she was violent and threatened them, and that's why she was segregated each time. She reported often to say, "Do you know who I am? I'm Aileen Wuornos from TV, and I'm in here for murder." She's like, "Do not mess with me."
She's like, "Don't you know what I did? I'm gonna tell you."
Don't you know me from television? Even though we're in jail?
Like, I mean, they have TV in jails. They probably.
I mean, yeah, but there wasn't a lot of media attention either. So was she on television?
But well, I know she did a lot of like interviews later, but I don't know if that was like after the trial, during the trial.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because she never really got out, so I don't know when she would have done the. Because my book just talked about like quotes that she said in interviews, and I'm like, when did she do these interviews?
I did see a documentary, and they like sat down with her. I saw part of it, not all of it, and they kind of like sat down with her and just was like talking to her. So maybe that. So she did end up being indicted on charges in connection with Richard Mallory. So she was charged with first-degree murder, armed robbery with a firearm or deadly weapon, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. And so all of the murders occurred when Aileen and Tyra were kind of rocky, like their relationship wasn't good. So was it motivated by sex or money, or did she feel powerful and in control when she had money, like as she did as a child? So, you know, it's like, what's kind of going in here? And the first defense lawyer resigned after controversy over referring the movie producer to Aileen's lawyer for her 1981 robbery charge. So even her lawyer, who's supposed to defend her, is getting in some deep poo-poo.
Yeah.
And I don't know which lawyer it was, but part of the documentary I watched, I only watched part of it because it was a follow-up and I couldn't watch the first one. But they were following up because one of her lawyers got a lot of money from the documentary production crew to get an interview with her. So it's like a bunch of
shady stuff.
A bunch of Florida shit, basically.
Yes. Just remember where it takes place, guys. That's all you need to know.
So her new lawyer tried to have the confession tape suppressed as it would be prejudicial to the jury, but they allowed it. Shirley Humphreys talked about how hard it was seeing the confession tape on the news repeatedly, and in every newspaper she picked up with detailed description of how her husband was murdered, and Aileen's account that she had sex with all of them and they tried to hurt her. Dick was in fact fully clothed, and there was no condoms or semen present at the scene, so investigators doubt he'd been eliciting sex. So in the fall of 1991, lawyers tried to get multiple life sentences in exchange for guilty pleas to avoid the death penalty, which probably would have saved a lot of money. But the county Charles Cascadon was murdered in would not settle. They wanted the death penalty, and they wanted, because, you know, she shot him 9 times. They wanted to go to trial. They wanted her to get the death penalty. Yeah. So Their tactic then changed to self-defense, and that the investigation was tainted by police officers seeking a movie deal. The trial for Richard Mallory's murder began January 13th, 1992, and so jury selection, they tried to find jurors who had not heard the confession tapes on Late Night Talk Show, which, good luck, I guess. And they also had to find jurors willing to give the death penalty. So the prosecutor, John Tanner, apparently was also trying to, get her to convert to the Christian faith and trying to save her. So the prosecutor, John Tanner, had previously tried to save Ted Bundy, in the Christian faith, wanted to convert him before he was executed, so he kind of has ties to that too. So Tyra testified that Aileen had never told her that Richard Mallory had raped or harmed her in any way. She testified Aileen had told her she'd been raped and beaten before they met, but not the night that she killed Richard Mallory. So the defense honed in on the fact that in the taped telephone calls, so Aileen said she would do anything to protect Tyra, and so they're also trying to kind of show, Tyra could be guilty too, to give the jury reasonable doubt that it wasn't Aileen. So they testified about speaking with cops and a lawyer about the movie and the book deal. The judge has not yet ruled on whether or not the pending charges of 6 additional homicides would be allowed at trial. Lawyers have to be careful not to bring them up. I know that happens a lot because if those are dismissed or something happens with them, it can make this whole trial be a mistrial or get a new trial. So the defense lawyer asked Tyra if Aileen said in the phone calls that she killed Richard in self-defense, and Tyra said not in reference to Mr. Mallory. So the judge had the jury leave the courtroom and told them, you gotta be careful, you gotta watch it. So there were 4 motions for a mistrial, and all were denied. And the judge finally ruled he would allow the information about the other cases and pending trials to be introduced. So very detailed information about these trials, including family on the stand, identifying their property, was included. So Aileen took the stand describing the night she killed Richard Mallory. So she said she was undressed when he told her he didn't have enough money. So she told him, she's calling it off. And then she said he wrapped a cord around her neck and threatened to kill her like the other sluts. That's in quotes. Said he tied her to the steering wheel and anally raped her, and said he took some items out of his trunk to clean himself with because, quote, other sluts had given him diseases. Says he cleaned her anus with rubbing alcohol in a Visine bottle, and that he untied her and put the rope around her neck, and says he slapped her in the face and started choking her. Said they struggled and she spit in his face, and he said, quote, you're dead, bitch. She said she was able to reach into her bag and grab her pistol and shoot him. And she went home with the car, and the hotel was packed up because they were supposed to move that day. Although Tyra says they weren't scheduled to move that day, but soon. So, and then when questioned about why she didn't tell the detectives during her interview concession, she says she's tried to, but they just kept interrupting her with other questions and didn't give her a chance to speak. Which the jury knew wasn't true because they'd seen the footage.
Yep.
So now she says she doesn't remember anything because she was hysterical and in shock and was only there to proclaim Tyra's innocence because she was told they were going to arrest her. So she's like, I only did any of this because I'm protecting Tyra. And she says she spent 15 minutes with the interviewers before the tape was introduced, and that they threatened her even though the beginning of the tape shows them all introducing themselves. And now she says she lied, and Tyra did have knowledge of the murders, but she was trying to protect her. So Aileen, if any of this is the truth, is not doing herself any favors.
Nope.
So in the closing arguments, the defense said her profession did not mean she asked to be raped or that she should be taken any less serious in her self-defense claims. And the prosecution claimed she asked for it because this is the 90s and probably today this would happen too, but
yeah.
So on January 27th, 1992, jury returned in 91 minutes and found her guilty of first-degree murder.
Which is a super quick,
like,
jury deliberation for first-degree murder.
Yeah, that's like an hour and a half, which is, at this point, this episode.
Yes.
If not, this episode will probably be longer than the jury deliberated. This episode
will be longer than the time that the jury decided that this woman was guilty of first-degree murder.
Yes. Yeah. So, just to put that in perspective. So, which is just weird because we're telling her story. So, it's like, dang, like, anyway.
Right.
So the next day, they started with sentencing, and they told the jury that they did not require a unanimous vote, but required only a majority of 7 jurors. I don't know if this changed, because I thought you had to have unanimous vote. I don't know.
Courtney and I both thought that, so we were a little confused when we read that. But at least at this time, you only had to have 7 people say that you should be put to death to legally put you to death, which blows my mind. But
yeah. So the factors that could lead them to recommend death is that it was murder in the first degree, committed while in act of a robbery or murder, committed for the purpose of financial gain. So they're like, she only murdered these people for their money. Elizabeth McMahon, who was an expert in neuropsychology and clinical psychology, testified that Aileen had borderline personality disorder and cortical brain damage. And so she believed Aileen truly thought she was in a life or death situation, and she might not be able to tell right from wrong in that state. So we know Aileen has some trauma, and clearly she could possibly have personality disorder, and so she might just not be able to logically think through situations sometimes.
Yeah, because they said, like, if you asked Aileen, like, is it wrong to kill someone, like, in a neutral setting, she would be able to say yes, but in that instance, even though we know she probably didn't actually have reason to fear for her life, she felt like she did. So
Dr. Kropp, who was a clinical psychologist and forensic psychiatrist who was an expert in sexual abuse, agreed and said she met all 8 of the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder. And the DSM-3 did require only 5 for this diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So the DSM-5, which is the current most up-to-date one, defines borderline personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image and affects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following criteria, which is frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, hello Aileen, pattern of unstable or intense relationships, hello Aileen, which could also alternate between idealization and devaluation, identity disturbance, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, which is sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, self-mutilating behavior, a suicidal behavior / ideation, intense mood changes, which can be noted because so many people were like, she was super nice, and then she drank, and she was so mean.
Yeah.
Chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate and intense anger, and paranoid ideation. They said hypersexuality was common after childhood sexual abuse because she doesn't have a healthy relationship with sex. And her brother Barry testified for the prosecution that their father did not beat them and admitted he had not talked to Aileen or her lawyers since the arrest. He left a home when Aileen was 10 and says he didn't know anything about her hearing problems.
But yet he's here testifying for the prosecution that she deserves to die when it's like, you don't even know this person. Like,
yeah, because I mean, he probably didn't see Aileen until like since she was 10. So like,
yeah.
So on January 30th, after 108 minutes of deliberation, so a little bit longer from when they found her guilty.
A little bit.
Again, probably not as long as this episode.
Right.
Jury returned 12 votes for a death sentence. And on March 31st, she pled no contest to the murders of David Spears, Troy Burress, and Dick Humphreys, so there would be no trial. And the penalty phase would allow jury to decide if she would get another death sentence or life in prison. So, jury returned after 4 hours and voted 10-2 for death, so now she was sentenced to 4 death sentences, which, pun intended, seems a little bit like overkill.
Yes.
So then, in June of 1992, she pled guilty to the murder of Charles Cascadon. And then, he comes back up in August of 1992. Corky Reed, who they thought was dead and a victim, shows back up in Las Vegas, and he'd just run away, and he's alive. Yep. So
he's like, I just didn't want to deal with all the things I had going on with my family, so I just abandoned my car and took off. And
yeah, which
makes sense when Aileen had no idea who this man was.
When she said, who the fuck is that? So February 1993, jury voted for death 7-5 for the murder of Walter Gino Antonio, and so she did receive a 6 death sentence. So she's just receiving all the death sentences.
Yep.
So they did file an appeal, which was based on a Dateline episode that revealed some of the history I talked about with Richard Mallory, about his time in the institution in Maryland and how he was convicted of attempting to rape someone.
Because none of that was allowed in the trial.
Yeah.
So the jury didn't know that this man had a history of sexual assault.
Yeah, but they said this information's not relevant to Eileen's self-defense claim as it happened so long ago and Aileen didn't know about it. Which I'm like, okay, but you have history that her saying he might have raped her could have been true.
Yeah.
And it could be self-defense. Because in my little speculation corner, what Courtney thinks is that she possibly did kill Richard in self-defense because she has trouble distinguishing between reality and, like, fiction and all that stuff. And then once she got away with it, she just started killing other people for money because it was so easy and she got away with it. Like,
yeah, because she killed Richard in
December?
Yeah, December of 89, and then she didn't kill the next man until May.
Yeah,
I think.
Like mid-year.
And then between May and September, she killed the other 6.
Yeah, like it was like very fast started happening.
Yeah.
So that's why, and like everyone else, it seems like maybe she was hitchhiking, and like Richard actually probably would have been with her for sex work. So
yeah,
that's where I kind of think. Doesn't excuse any of it, but that's just kind of what it seems.
Honestly, to me, the self-defense does make sense for Richard, knowing his history, knowing that what the other sex workers who had been with him recently said, like this wasn't just a 30-year-ago thing.
Yeah.
And like you said, that he was known to pick up sex workers, so it would make sense that she was with him for that reason.
There was even another woman saying he choked me and tried to kill me. Like,
yeah.
So
it's like, yeah.
Okay, so they also appealed the Dick Humphreys, Troy Burress, and David Spears convictions, saying she was coerced into pleading no contest. It was denied and said she was questioned extensively at the time of the plea. She knew what she was doing. And then they appealed that there were witnesses willing to testify about Eileen's rough childhood and abuse, but the defense didn't call them. So they're really trying to do all these appeals, and basically the court is like, just shut up, we're not having it, basically.
You're like, you have like 6 death sentences.
Yeah.
Like,
they're like, oh yeah, okay, now you have 5. Like,
yeah.
So on February 10th, 2001, she did say in a television interview that she lied when she said she killed in self-defense. And she started writing to the Florida Supreme Court asking for her sentence to be carried out. And in one of her hearings, she said, I want to tell the world I killed those men, I robbed them, and I killed them cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. I'd kill another person because I've hated humans for so long. And then she also said she lied about being abused as a child. So, I mean, this is just Aileen constantly just talking gibberish, and who knows what's true. Like,
yeah.
They did say in jail that she read a lot of books on spiritual growth and was trying to get right with the Lord. Because she wants the Lord to forgive her for all these murders, I guess.
Which, I mean, is very common for people on death row,
Yeah,
so...
definitely. So Aileen was executed on October 9th, 2002 at Florida State Prison. There were 29 people present. There was 6 victims' relatives, 12 journalists, a state prosecutor, and a Department of Corrections officers. Officers that morning said she looked scared that day, and I'm like, I mean, I think any of us would, knowing we're about to be put to death. And just her final statement in Aileen fashion was, I'd just like to say that I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, just like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back. And if that made no sense, that's what all her confession tapes and transcripts sound like. So,
Yep.
So she was injected with 2 syringes of sodium pentanol, which makes her unconscious, 2 syringes of pancurium bromide, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, which paralyzes the muscles, and 2 syringes of potassium chloride, which does stop her heart, and she was officially pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m. And that is the very long, very crazy, very complicated story of Aileen Wuornos.
Yes, that was quite... These are 2 longest episodes yet. So, I've talked before on the podcast about my views personally about the death penalty, but I feel like especially in this case, knowing Eileen's history of abuse, knowing that she was mentally ill and that most likely played a factor in the murders that she committed, I don't know, it just seems so not the best way to carry out justice in this case, I feel like.
Yeah.
I don't know. And again, these are just Jaclyn's personal thoughts, just knowing everything that this woman went through and knowing, I mean, look at her final statement. Like, clearly this woman was very mentally ill, and
yeah.
I feel like it's wrong that we can put mentally ill people to death in this country. But again, at the same time, I mean, she was a 7-time murderess, so I get it.
Yeah.
But,
and as with this podcast, we always like to emphasize the victims and not always the murderer.
Yes.
So I will go ahead and read the names of her victims. It was Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Cascadon, Peter Siems, Troy Eugene Burress, Charles Dick Humphreys, and Walter Antonio.
Yep.
So those, unfortunately, are the lives lost. Very tragic, just very sad, because most of these men, I feel like, were newly engaged or, anything like that. And even if they were cheating on their wives, they don't deserve to be murdered. So,
yes. And it does sound like most of them were just trying to pick up a hitchhiker that they thought needed help, And yeah, but that is the first female serial killer in the United States, according to the FBI's definition of a serial killer.
Yes.
So, and with that, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
My perk of the week is, so we kind of had to stop recording in the middle of this podcast a little bit and come back. But in that break, we got to, which we didn't get to last week and we didn't get to yesterday because we've all been busy, but we got to get back together, me, Jaclyn, and Tiffany, and do our little FaceTime group workout. So it was super fun. I know it's only been like a week since we hadn't, but it felt like forever, and I missed you guys.
Yeah, it felt so long.
So I miss like human interaction, and so that's always nice to be able to work out with them and hang out with them. So as we said, this podcast was recorded like 12 hours later. Not much happened in that 12 hours. So that will be my perk of the week. Jaclyn, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is the book that I'm currently reading, which has been on all of the book lists lately, so I'm sure everyone's heard of it, but it's How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi. And so it is super good. It goes into a lot of like history, and it goes into different research studies that have been done, as well as this man's personal anecdotes being a black man in America, and it's just really good. And if you think to yourself that you don't need to learn how to be an anti-racist, then that just means this book is exactly for you, because we can all learn something more, and none of us are perfect, and we can all be like growing and learning and trying to do the best that we can. And it's just a really, really good book, and I have like a chapter and a half left, so I'm going to finish it after we finish recording today. So super excited about that, and that is my perk of the week.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list. I've been meaning to place in an order at a black-owned business, but I haven't been able to yet. So hopefully I will soon, and read some of those.
Yeah. Just a reminder, we're still running our contest. You can follow us on Instagram at Caffeinated Crimes Pod, and if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast, once we get 50 reviews and 100 followers on Instagram, we're going to do a drawing. You guys will get a sticker and a pin, as well as a $10 gift card to a coffee shop of your choice. You can also email us at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com. And if you feel so inclined, if you are willing and able, you can also go to patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes, where you could give us a donation and get some extra content and some goodies as well.
Yeah, so go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.